Bertha has announced. So community dinner, February 25th. We are now heading into the late spring officially, which is a certain energy associated with that. Like there's an acceleration after the first of the year, after the 5 days of floating on water, December 20th to 25th. And then there's this, I like the 5-element metaphor in Chinese medicine, which is this plasma energy. It's like water turning solid, the dream taking form. And in the life of the earth, in the yearly annual cycles, this is, so nature's, probably adapting pretty well, all things considered. So there was an early bunch of rain. There's debate about how hydrating the rain is, because I've told a few stories about the nucleated snow and the nucleated ice, and I believe there's nucleated water now, and the water's less hydrating because there's other elements added in with it because of the spray.
You boil and it doesn't melt.
Right, precisely. Or quickly, one guy had it in a jar. They collected snow out in Indiana a few years ago, and it snowed when it was 35, 37 degrees out. So it shouldn't have happened in the first place. It was too warm to snow, but they were causing the nucleated snow from spraying in the sky. And then she went and collected it. And then in the morning there was, snow melts, it melts down a certain amount. There's a formula for that, ice becomes water, this much snow becomes this much water, right? But there was no, and then the next morning, there was nothing left in the mason jar. There was this much snow packed to the top. In the morning, there was nothing there. And they're like, well, that's weird. Yeah. So then the next night they do the same thing, but they put the lid on the mason jar. And then it explodes in the middle of the night.
Whoa.
Implodes or explodes?
Explodes. Wow.
It should, I guess.
The snow is melting, and so it's expanding. And then, I've had a mason jar explode because of sauerkrauts and sodas,
Yeah.
I had the glass literally blow up.
Yeah.
I've heard that.
So it takes so much.
There's just, I can't even remember the force of what it must take, because the mason jar is sealed so tight. The only way for the gas to expand is to break the ice. Break the glass.
Yeah. Oh,
wow.
That's thick glass.
There's one Hindu guru that they say he died from his intestines exploding. The gas was so bad.
Ooh, wow.
Like literally burst, and he got sepsis.
It sounds very painful.
Wow, actually, I can believe that.
There was this, the metaphor was, as one of my teachers says, enlightenment doesn't have to look a particular way. So this guy was, he was kind of a big guru in India. I forgot his name. And his one fallibility was he just loved to eat. So he was like a food Buddha, right? He was always happy, he was pretty much always full. He was snacks and snack away. And I don't want to do the guy injustices, so I don't know how much more I could say accurately, but it was enough to say that, it's like, wow, despite, and there was a lot of talk in the Ajashanti circles about how awakening happens through us. There's no merit associated with awakening, and that what's awake, what's already awake in us wakes up through us. And so there's like a great, little songs about grace. Well, that's grace. Amazing grace, and that's what most of the enlightenment study I've done is around. Grace starts to run our lives, and that's what we were talking about earlier. So the freedom comes when we let go of our point of view about how we think the world should be, and yet paradoxically we still work towards that. How do we, and that's the Taoist saying, act without acting, do without doing. I first read that 25 or 30 years ago. I chewed on it for 5 or 10 years. Like, what? How can you act without acting? How can you do it? I was just like, and it was like a koan, and until I grokked it, it's like, oh, it means uncontrived effort. Like, when like a mother's love for her child is not contrived in any way, right? It's natural. It's just natural, versus like duty in the Taoist sayings, like the higher levels of awareness versus the lower, is duty is a lower level way of operating, right? Just because I should. I'm a patriot. I should be a loyal patriot. I should. And yet our inner gyroscope is fighting that, right? Like, and so always in a state of conflict of, because our heart's going, I don't know. And that's really what I've been seeing is in my practice the last 30 or 35 years is the twist. I was talking to a client today about it, the twist of what we have time for, how the system crunches people down into these, we have no time. How many of you feel a expansive sense of time?
Every now and then.
Wait, like, can I comment on that?
Yes, please do. Please do.
Because I had this going on the other day. Like, I was like, I have no time. But if you think about it, that's just a point of view.
Right.
So
Right.
if you didn't have that point of view, you know, what could you choose? Actually, your time is unlimited.
Yeah.
So you just have to shift and change your point of view and be like, okay, I do have time. It's actually a lie you're telling yourself when you say you don't have time. So,
You're just making priorities.
right, you're like, okay, then you can be like, okay, what would I like to choose to do right now? Or what, you know, what's gonna create the most for me right now?
Yes.
But I mean, time is a construct that's just used to limit us. So,
Because all that exists is here. See, that's all the asanas, all the great practices of yoga that you go back through the Vedic traditions, all they're pointing at is shamanic practices. They're all about the qigong practices, tai chi. It's all about giving the mind enough to chew on, to let go of all the stuff of the past and the future and all the stories, to finally let that awareness that's already here break through. And then there's this like, oh yeah, for me, there's so many levels to this over my lifetime of it just being presented to me. And Jean and I have really, expanded on my love of Kirtana, this one singer who is a Kirtan singer, and Gangaji was her guru, if you're familiar with Gangaji and Papaji through India and that lineage. And Kirtana would sing about this. She would sing to the fact that what we want is always and already here. And so there's these metaphors of like, stop rowing the boat for God's sakes. Just put the oars away. It's one of her metaphors, you know, just let go. Because in meditative practice, if we start to examine our own awareness like that, what drives that awareness to even want to be aware of, like what you were saying, Carol, like that's what's of interest to me is like not even the act itself, but what drove the act that was prior to the act itself. That's the grace part, because that's what I call the early warning part of consciousness, and even of physicality comes in. Like, what just drove that decision? Like, what compelled me to want to think that? What compelled me to get triggered? What compelled me to even think of this versus this other thing, or the zillion other things I could have thought of in any given moment? Why this now? Why, when I pray for a week to meet the owner of this other property up the road from mine, just so I could have a meeting with the guy that I had met 5 years before and didn't even know he'd remember me. I prayed for a meeting because I drive up and down the mountain a few times a week. And I was guided to leave back from Santa Cruz at a certain precise moment because I'm kind of listening. And then the chances of me meeting him, there's a 5-minute window driving up this mountain road. And I met him precisely halfway, right where I like to stop and take a view, because there's vineyards below. And I'm like, oh my God, there he is. So what drove that? I put out what I call the waiter presents to the chef, like on the cook line, right? You put up your request to the chef and the food comes out later. The divine's that way. We put up our request on the cook wheel of God, I call it. And
God's a shorter cook.
and sometimes you get exactly what you order, and sometimes you get something different because it's always perfect. But see, then the judge comes in because it is always perfect. Why? Because it's happening right now. So the work that as I've always seen it is, what do I need to change within myself to adapt to what if this never changes kind of thing? Like, because now this is the way it is. And I can have my dream, but if I'm not in alignment with what's happening right now, then I'm going to suffer. Right? That's the start of disease, lack of ease, vata derangement, they call it in Ayurveda. Your vata gets deranged. I always love the derangement word. my teacher Adyashanti would have liked it because he had sort of in my opinion, a morbid sense of humor. One of my favorite quotes of his that got me really into him was, I'm not one of those passive gurus. He goes, if a burglar comes in my house, I'm going to hit him over the head with a hammer. I was like, oh my God. And I believe there's a method behind that. He's trying to provoke a reaction back then because he was very raw when he was younger. And it was like, oh my God, that's really audacious thing to say, for especially a guy that has the audience of something that's 500 people at a time, wow, audacity. That's quite a study in audacity. He was one of my models. Kramer was the other. Just audacious lack of inhibition, just to be what we are, because to me, that's freedom. So tonight there were a couple of topics. I was going to put up a whiteboard. See what just drove that? And I got a little prompt. Oh, okay, that's like somebody was like, one of the angels was like, hey, get your topic board up. Okay, I'm following orders, I swear. Don't beat me up. So tonight's topic plus improv Q&A. I made this little whiteboard thing from the email. So Shahid, who is, I'm working with the Seventh Element Africa, and I guess I didn't do my intro properly, but this probably won't be used much other than YouTube, this is Health Alchemy, and this is Craig Lane, and we have our little private membership things here. So first thing, I guess, the disclaimer is this is a private membership, and so whatever you're viewing here is be kept within the confines of this video, and we're not going to say too much in public realm anyways. It's all going to be general, just interesting topic stuff. And then, so the natural law has been a theme that, what is natural law? So I've been practicing my elevator speech. And so, and then that's one topic. How can we align with the forces of natural law or the universe or nature? And then we're in the spring forward. I was talking about the expanding energy of late winter and spring. And then there's a liver cleanse coming up on April 1st. It was going to be in March. We pushed it out because just trying to get a few different things going at once instead of everything at once. Like, this is generally my way. Shahid's been great. It's like, now this month we're going to do this, and here's the plan. And I just sort of follow orders. Like, okay, I'm a content producer. I can let go of this other baloney. And it's just so nice to have other leadership. Like, you all have leadership in what I call health alchemy, right? And it is a community. And like I was telling you about the truckers in Ottawa, it didn't matter what the government or concessions or police brutality even. It was like, I got the community behind me. And one of the Mankind Project processes that I went through is I was in a vulnerable stage a few years ago where I was learning to facilitate, but there was still the lack of self-confidence that who am I to sort of facilitate really high-level men. And this guy came up from behind me. He said, I have a hit on what might help you. And there's these points right here on the kidney meridian that's going up, and they're called spirit gate points. And you see Jesus doing this in some of those. You see Jesus doing this in some of those paintings. Ever seen that? Where Jesus is, and there's like light coming out. The spirit gate points, heart. And so he came up behind me, and he was held like that. And I had requested that 3 or 4 men stand behind him, so that I could face this, and maybe it was a tyrant in my past or something. So we were going to recreate a scene. And if I felt like I had the quote community of men behind me, and this guy held me here, and he goes, next time you're in an act where you feel like you're alone, which generally the empaths get, because the world's so weird. There's so much incoming, especially in today's world where it's just disharmonized chaos out there. I mean, look around us. And so he said, I want you to remember next time that you're in a moment of stress that you've got all your men behind you. You have all of us behind you. We've got your back. And that stuck with me, even, the somatic sense, that sense of like, I know that even one of my favorite new young genre, Trevor Hawley has a line in one of his songs, I know spirit's got my back. Like, that's freedom. Because we can't be vulnerable until we know our power. But there's just no way, otherwise we're a fool. Because we're just leaking energy, right? Chinese medicine, right? We're just leaking chi if we're just going to go be vulnerable and open about everything about ourselves in front of a group of people who may use it against us later. That's what one of my teachers talks about of, the enlightened person knows when to close the shutters and when to open them, so to speak. Is it appropriate to even open up now? And generally, when this is operating correctly, we know what's safe and what's not, just by, as a kid, I was hyper alert because my mom was always afraid of me being kidnapped because I was a beautiful child with bright blue eyes and blonde hair. And this one guy did try and get me. He's like, hey, you want to go for a ride? And one of those moments I was on my little kid bike and terrified, and just the realization, like there's something that evil out there, and to me, that's the alchemy of it though, is when we know we've got the community's got our back. Like I knew my mom had my back, so I just sort of rode home as fast as I could, right? With that sense of like, oh, this person, even despite this horrible turmoil, I know that somebody's got my back. And so part of the expanding energy of late spring and winter is, there's a lot of heart energy in the summer because the summer is a metaphor of fire, which is blood, right? Because fire is a mediating element of matter and air, right? Fire transforms logs into smoke, which goes up in the air, right? So fire is what mediates consciousness and what the alchemists call the soul, or the Ayurvedics call kapha, earth and water. Chinese have another metaphor, wood, but wood really is more of a metaphor in my world because it's expanding energy, it's expanding in all directions. Like this plasma water I've been talking to you guys about, that had someone the other day that was in kind of a turmoil about a COVID diagnosis and just a normal cold and flu symptoms. So just processed her with a few things, some energy medicine, this plasma water, basically this hydrogen, you guys have, some of you have seen it at the other house. And within 2 hours, she was out of pain and like 90% better. But a lot of it is the consciousness spin out, and that's part of what blood's the mediator. So if this is all spun out, then the grace might pop in and like, oh, maybe I should just take a breath and ground myself, or put my feet on the bare earth, or do what I call, the leg swings, which, and it's one movement of just standing and finding our center for a moment, and then starting to swing our legs, because the psoas unites the pelvis with the spine. It's the only muscle that does so, is the psoas. But there's also a muscle of fear. Where do they have us all day? Well, the psoas is all constrained and tight, which makes the low back vertebrae poke out, and then you get herniations in the disc, because the disc is always, it's not like this, it's like this all day. And then the remedy is, that's why Pilates is so effective, because the remedy is get those core muscles engaged. Like when I tore my rotator cuff in my shoulder a number of years ago, I couldn't do anything. So I would sit in place and do stuff like this, because my body knew, like, I got to offset, these muscles are overused back here. We have to use the muscles in the front. And consciousness is like that. Consciousness needs time to rest. And consciousness needs time of activity. The body needs time of rest. The body needs time of activity. So, look, I have a bunch of new cases that came in, and I'm just sorry about that. I was going through my paperwork today. I was like, oh, I have to do your report of findings, and which I really enjoy, because I was telling this guy today, it's like detective work. And I was remember the game Clue?
Yeah.
Oh my God, I couldn't get enough Clue as a kid. It's just the idea of solving a mystery, and people are these ineffable mysteries because everyone's God. Everyone's God on some level, and it's like, wow, this is another Buddha, and this is their golden Buddha, and this is their shadow Buddha. So how do we bring together the two Buddhas? Because this often this part of ourselves that we call the inner child in the men's work is in conflict with sort of the warrior in us. Like in Hindu, it's like the Kali Ma, like the dark force, and then there's like so it's this duality thing, and so we get in these oppositions inside of ourselves, and it sort of tears us apart, and we have lack of ease. So natural law is learning first of all, is learning, where do we start with is our baseline, right? Well, I answered a friend's query the other day with silence. And he went on and on about something, and it was almost like he was fishing for a response. So my response was no response. And we just 30 seconds of silence. I just sat. What one of my teachers called colluding, COLLUDING, and colluding or in collusion together. And most people can only take eye contact so long. Yes, he broke after about 30 seconds. But I'm happy to hang out for sometimes minutes, hours, because I've ground myself down into that silence for up to 10 days at a time. And it's like, I mean, aren't you curious what happens if you go into silence for 10 days and don't talk? Like, what's going to happen to yourself? Imagine like going to a Vipassana retreat for 10 days and all you're doing is eating 2 meals a day. Dinner is tea and fruit. You're not even allowed to do yoga. I tried to do yoga and got busted. Went off into the woods up in North Fork and they busted me for doing yoga. I mean, literally, I was like, I got to wind all this tension out. And their counter argument was that tension is what you need to sit through. Good argument. You're trying to do what Adyashanti would call a spiritual chiropractic adjustment. Why don't you sit with the discomfort and see what happens? And I was like, damn, you got me. And so that you're in a cooker because you're not allowed to read, no music, no journaling. You're grinding it out, you and yourself, just me and myself for 10 days. I mean, I can see you can imagine that, right? Just imagine no children, just me and myself in the silence with about 100 other people.
Mothers like a break. Like, really? Nothing?
Right? Right? So there's like, Adyashanti has, I guess his metaphors, I need to use it, but it's not the greatest, but he calls it, the trash can. So the top layers of the trash can come out and you get down to like, usually by about day 3 or 4, you're down in some layers where, I remember being at some layers where I'd sit in these half-hour meditations and God, I haven't had that come up since I was like 6.5 years old. Holy mackerel. If I hadn't sat here in silence for 3.5 days, there was no way this ever would have came up. It was like these layers. It gets down to of like unprocessed material, because that's what consciousness naturally does, is it comes in for the next darkest thing. And then that gets seen and liberated. And then it goes down for the next darkest thing. And that gets liberated. And that's why I call it going down the cave. If you know the Shakespeare and Aristotle, the allegory of the cave. You guys know the allegory of the cave? It's exactly what it is. I mean, there's literally people that would rather be in the darkness, in the safe shadow, chained to the wall. Why? Because it's secure. It's the status quo. And it's safe. And I don't have to do anything. And I get fed. All I have to do is just sit here all day with the chains on me and stare at the fire. That's okay for some. I mean, if that's what this consciousness wants to do for its existence, then who are we to judge? Right? But usually, like, plants grow towards the sun, right? So I asked you that, remember Monica, I asked you that query, like, what do humans grow towards? The light. Well, what does that mean? Because there's an inner light and an outer light, right? I told you my experiences in the last few years. The first time it happened, it was utterly shocking. Castaneda had some loose ideas around the whole Don Juan Matus tradition about this light. And one day I was riding my bike down Happy Valley, getting towards evening, and it was obviously twilight, getting dark. And I kept feeling like there was a bright light coming in from behind me. I kept turning around going, where is that light coming from? And then in my car driving home, I'd parked somewhere and ridden my bike on the loop up Rodeo Gulch and then down through Branciforte Valley and then back. And that was always a nice challenging loop as a biker. And but then driving home in the dark, and is there a car behind me? Oh my God. And so Yogananda has this metaphor of the movie projector that drives the third eye screen up here is in the medulla oblongata. And so the spiritual light, it is literally coming from the back of the brain towards the front of the brain in their viewpoint. which is fascinating because those are all the control centers in the reptilian brains down there. But that's why they would say that the feminine is the source of all creation, because that's what this all is. It's just this is all the yang part, this is all the active part, and this is all the yin part of the brain back here, where all the primal stuff is. So it's that the movie projector of life is coming from the primal part into the conscious part, which we call the cerebral cortex, right?
Eyes in the back of your head. So,
Well, that light, right? It's this metaphor of the light growing towards the light. I actually, on a paradoxical level, on the level of ego, there's actually a shedding of ego at the same time that the light is growing. One of Ajah's metaphors was, the more I know myself, the less I know about myself. The more I know myself, the less I know about myself. Krishnamurti just popped in from another teaching that's related to this. His quote about this was that once the child labels the type of bird, he no longer knows the bird. Because the label is the attachment of, oh, I know, versus what is that? It's two totally different states of being. See, that's what we're in right now in the world. Science has been settled. I don't know how many times I'm going to barf. I hear that. It's just disgusting. What are you talking about? There's no such thing as a settled science. By its very definition, like this. So that what's happening about in this hopeful part that I always try to keep bringing forward, because my job as a facilitator is make sure the container stays to a certain level of harmony. And in the Mankind Project, we talk about container busters. As a DJ, you'll have a song, a crowd buster, right? You get to put a song out there, and then the dance floor clears. Mm-hmm. That's kind of how it is as a facilitator of a group too. It's like having the broad enough vision to be able to sort of feel everybody and go, oh, there's something out of harmony over here, and then okay, what's going on? Oh, I see, and then redirecting. And where was I going with that? For God's sakes.
Christian.
So once we label something, thank you. And you'll see this familiar theme that I keep bringing everything back to. So aligning with natural law. And there was something that came up in a query about, this, my meditations, like I've been doing, my practice has gotten shorter and shorter. And it's weird because we choosing, like to me, the constant monitoring of the victim, the victim consciousness, like, oh, I don't have any time. Remember, there's that. When it gets to that voice, I know that I've missed a few signals. It's like, oh fuck, I could have caught it a few days ago at this. Because there's always a little tiny little voice in us that gets sort of drowned out by the uproar of the world. See, he's gone to, it's like this client today, I just told her, you're on a drug that allows you to stay focused, but one of the side effects of the drug is it affects your sleep. But you tell me your sleep is the main way you're able to stay focused. You see the loop that the pharmaceutical industry gets you stuck in. So what I've been working at is what I call, so I'm taking a bypass step. I told her so, I'm taking a bypass step over here. And I go, what came up for me was when I was 21, I broke my neck. And then it was obvious that Western medicine was only going to get me so far. So then when I went back to Cal Poly, my life's a freak show, you guys. There's something driving me that's beyond human. That 3.5 weeks out of a halo-based broken neck, I was surfing at Moss Landing with my friends, where the doctor said, you'll never surf again a few months earlier. And that's where there's a Braveheart part of me that's like, yeah, that's your projection, buddy. Watch me. In the men's group, there's often this polar opposite. Like this one guy was constantly told by his family that he wasn't enough in different various ways. And so what did he become? The hardest working guy ever. He still talks about it because it shaped his early life of like, oh yeah. So then there's this like, for some people, they get hammered like that. And what happens to them? They give in, they collapse, give in. And that's sheep. Because there's three broad groups of consciousness. There's those that are asleep, and they're mostly asleep, and that's what we call a sheep. Then there's those that are awake, and there's various degrees of people, how awake they are in their day-to-day consciousness. What's my definition of being awake in day-to-day consciousness? This is natural law stuff. This is where it all starts. How do you know if you're awake and aware in day-to-day consciousness? Because when I talk about asleep at the wheel, there's a certain parameter we have to establish in language. So what is the language I'm using around whether we're asleep or the wheel to not when we're talking or interacting? Questioning everything.
Or how present we are.
Present.
Aware of watching yourself as opposed to,
Aware of watching ourselves.
and watching others, being able to
I think,
step outside.
yeah, and if you can tell when people are lying to you.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So I call that the figure eight. Can I get, it feels to me like I put a sonar out, like a boomerang, and then there's a return. And the martial artists talk about this. Like I learned it naturally. I learned a little bit of martial arts, but I learned it through doing eye gazing. I used to lead eye gazing workshops back when Ya Yen first came to Santa Cruz and had her La Vie in downtown Santa Cruz. One of the first workshops there was called the Seeing Eyes. That's why people eye gazing for varying lengths of time. I was always fascinated with what can happen when we let go enough, because after a few minutes of eye gazing with a single person and you throw in some breathing with it, there are other faces that start to appear, and these are like past lives, and and you keep going deeper and deeper. I've done it hundreds of times. I can tell you through scientific evidence of what I've seen over and over. It's a fascinating exercise, especially with the lover, because then I had this one lover. I had so much more compassion for her because I saw this Indian life she had previously, and her name was Nahita, and I was like, wow, now I understand your behavior because of this imprint somewhere in your existence. Like, wow. And I would call those eddies in consciousness. My teacher would call them, one of his awakening experiences was he said there was this vast awareness and there was these bubbles, and he was like traveling along in this universe, dark sky with bubbles everywhere. And he said some of them would be drawn to, and then he would jump into the bubble, and it would be like a memory of an unresolved, issue early in his life or in a previous life. And then the bubble would pop, and then he would feel bigger. And that's been my experience of some big cathartic awakenings, especially on silent retreats. I'm like, oh, I thought I was that, but I call it the zooming of consciousness. It can zoom down to an atom, and it's one of the energetic breaths, as this one book teaches. Consciousness can zoom way out as big as the universe, and it can go zoom in to an atom. And that's a Vipassana technique. You can zoom in on one little atom and follow it in and out of your breath. That's one of the techniques. Imagine an atom or a piece of dust is going in. Imagine doing that for a few minutes. It's very hypnotic. To start to like Pinocchio inside the whale, like, oh, I'm inside myself. You can have the sound effects not included, of course, but
They're a little distracting.
But when you're sitting with yourself for 10 days, you find ways to distract yourself. Believe me, you're sitting in silence, like, what are you saying to myself? For minutes on end, and then I'd be doing some and you can't. And there's another periods where at the Goenki to Vipassanas where there are periods where you're not allowed to move even. Like if you're in a large group of 100, and you have distracting, people are sneezing and whatnot. So if you're a distraction, I'll put you in another room.
Right.
Like unbelievable stuff where I remember, for me, not moving, because remember, if you don't move, your lymph doesn't move.
Right.
And so there's an iridology type. I call them the blue-eyed types. They're called lymphoid types. And so I believe the blue-eyed people have the hardest time with it, because if you're not, so there are ways to move your lymph in yogic ways through breathing and whatnot, and visualizations probably, and Cindy Toon would probably chime in some other things too. And that's the subtleties they're trying to grind your consciousness down into, though, is that they're just grinding you down to dust. And that's one of the Khalil Gibran things, one of the poems about love, is it grinds us to dust. It grinds the ego. And you can let go of that and not go all the way. And then it says you'll only shed part of your tears and only feel part of your joy, but that's okay. And in the Bible, the metaphor is, there's a really brutal metaphor of you, when you bring forth that which is within you, that which is within you will save you. If you do not bring forth that which is within you, that which is within you will destroy you.
Wow.
My version of that is if I don't give people body work, and I don't, like when the energy is what I call selfish energy, is good selfishness is the return of regenerative energy, yoga, sitting in silence. I know what I need to do. It's just getting up time to do it. And then it naturally turns outward into a natural overflow of kindness, satisfaction, joy. That's agape in Greek. It means natural overflow, uncontrived love, gratitude, appreciation. Because my natural state is not appreciative and grateful. I'll be honest with you guys. It's taken 35 years of work to get me to the point where I'm farther along, but based on, you all know, we grew up with just hammers and putting shields up and traumas and, like, wow, it's amazing that we sit in this room having these high level conversations, right? Yeah.
Gotta add this phrase that came to me from an artist. I started out with nothing, and thankfully I still have most of it left. Isn't that awesome?
So I gotta repeat that further. I was told to repeat that stuff because the mic isn't that great. So one author said, prompt me along because my memory's horrible.
Oh, yeah. I started out with nothing.
I started out with nothing.
And thankfully I have most of it left.
And thankfully I have most of it left. So there you go. That's natural law. Dan Millman had a metaphor. He was in a restaurant. He ordered orange juice, and all they had was grape juice. So he said, he reversed it. He said, okay, instead of trying to get what I want, I'll want what I get. I'm like, that's a good reversal. I'll want what I get. I'm like, that's excellent. That's repentance.
Real gratitude.
So speaking of like natural law, so I'm learning about, the origins of even like Shahid and I were having this talk today about language. And so he's like, well, Aramaic was he had his accent. I couldn't understand what he said. I was like, and I was like, and I find, oh, it's Aramaic. And because English is his second language, so it's sometimes just like, like, what did that, you spell that? Like, what was that? And I was always, I had an English minor. I got my first bachelor's degree. I knew I was like, this is way too dry of material. I'm going to need some liberal arts minor to ground this out. So I chose English because linguistics was just like the origins of language and words. Like, oh my God, like that's what natural law is about. We start looking at words. Like I got a couple more I got to look up. Like rule was when I just looked up, like the word rule in the dictionary versus Black's law. Like it's the origins of words.
Bouvier's dictionary, that's better for.
Bouvier's
real common law, right? Yeah, you know that one too. This one brought it several times.
Well, I'm using Black's law because it's kind of what's familiar in the world of the legal, the world of law.
Bouvier's is law.
Remind me of that later, please, or even text me that because I'd like to get that while they're still around, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Having a library is like gold right now.
Yeah, see, that's the other thing I was gonna mention is it's better to use older dictionaries.
Absolutely.
'cause they
Older
change-
dictionaries.
They changed the
Mhm.
definition.
They took
of
out
words.
the biblical references.
Really?
1828 Webster's. Get it from
1828 Webster's.
Yeah.
Nice.
How big is it?
District.
Nice.
Yeah,
Yeah, now we're talking.
Yeah.
From what
Yeah, I have an American Heritage 9th edition, probably like 80s or 90s. So I've had it a long time. It's like, it's ridiculous. It's like that fat. And then I have a word origins book, and I have a poet's handbook, and it's like so Aramaic being the root of all and then I challenged him a bit. I said, well, what about Sanskrit? And then we went into this thing of like how language shapes our reality is like in Sanskrit, even the intonation of a certain word tells you so much about what the person's actually saying. Even the slightest pitch of sound. I took a few workshops, just basic little workshops in Sanskrit. And it's like, you got to start on this stuff when you're like an infant, like the subtleties of how this language, and Shahi was pointing out like in Aramaic, in one of the languages of Islam, there's a 150 words for describing what a horse does. Yeah, and I'm like, wow. And like some languages up in the snow have hundreds of different words to describe snow. Because if you're sitting around all day and there's no television, that's one of the things. It was on Facebook about being bored driving creativity. Do you guys see that thread? I'll put that up. It was brilliant. It was like creative people need time to be bored so that their creativity could come out. And then a bunch of people challenge that, and I agree, is like, no, just sitting in silence. Like, I haven't been bored since I was a teenager, to be honest. Boredom is not part of my existence.
That's what school's for.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Ever since I got out of school, I stopped being bored. No, in elementary school, I would literally watch the second hand. Maybe you guys just watched.
I feel so sorry.
So
for kids who have
bored.
digital box.
The Charlie Brown. Like, you just shut up for a minute.
Never watch the clock.
It's the worst thing to do.
Worst thing you can do, yeah.
It's the worst thing you can do.
No, actually, I made a lot of fun watching the. I tested myself in every possible
True.
breath holding. I mean, I got way more out than boredom. Way more.
So we had our all day stress reduction, speaking, looking in each other's eyes and stuff. So the first thing that the person who was in charge would do would cover the clock with the word now.
Right.
We have a clock that every hour says now.
Yeah. I posted that on my Instagram page, yeah.
You'll never get.
Nice.
That's all there is now.
Nice.
But the saddest part is how many youngers can't read a 12, regular dial clock.
Yeah.
Cannot.
Well, that's the natural law. So he's like,
3 hours ago.
that's what makes you golden, Monica, because that's God being Monica. Like the rest of us don't think that way, but God thinks that way through you, and then God thinks a certain way through Carol, and God thinks a certain way through me,
Yeah.
and we all get to run this YouTube, Zoom, whatever, because it's all the sacred now, right? And so we're in the sacred now having a discussion about natural law and spring energy, and well, as I mentioned, the improv, my own disclaimer is always like, well, you never know where this is going to go on some level. But that's what is sort of endearing, is the ability to just, like, no television, no nothing. We can have a discussion and ideally some movement, maybe after dinner, like this sort of the after meal thing is, I can always tell, like, evening, most people are kind of at our age too, that you're getting ready to wind down. And that's where I could I could change the energy if I wanted to. Like if some of these spiritual retreats, like you're up at 6 meditating, yoga, breakfast at 8, and then they'll keep you up until 10, just to push you all the way to your edge. Get up at 6 and you're in process till 10. So, if you're not a good sleeper, you might be wound up until midnight, and then the gong's going off at 6 a.m. Right? Gong. Like some of the Buddhist retreats I've been to. And it's really interesting at that edge, right? I call it, there was a discussion I was having in another group about conscious suffering leads to less unconscious suffering.
Oh,
It's been my experience.
Yeah.
So there was some metaphor about the old, I was talking to, it was the magical Bromer Street storage lady, Nicoletta, just a delightful connection of someone I forgot about, and just a local business I've been supporting whenever I need a storage place as a, sort of a staging area or temporary or long-term storage. I just love these people because up until just a few years ago, they weren't taking credit cards. They have no website, they're always full pretty much. Locals love them. So I called to get a storage shed, and all my friends had said, oh, it's not available. They're all full. And I called up. She's like, of course there's a room for you. One just opened up yesterday, 5x14. I was like, I just love angel prompts, And she goes, don't you remember me? I'm Nicoletta. I'm your Facebook friend. And I comment and all that. And I was like, then I put 2 + 2. Goes, oh, you're the Nicoletta. Because sometimes Facebook friends are like, what the, who, what? And I was like, oh my God. And so I couldn't pull myself away fast enough. I just didn't want to pull away from this conversation. Went on for over an hour in this in Bromer Street storage office. Because she's one of us, you know, and we were talking about how consciousness is being shaped, and we got into that, the Indians, you know, and I told about my story with manifest destiny, and that's when I woke up. My mom had me sort of in this beautiful bubble until I was about 15, my freshman year in high school, and then I had US history, and I saw this word manifest destiny, and white men, you know, white men, man, it was his destiny to control this continent, blah, blah, blah. And part of me went, what the F? I started asking questions, you know, going, oh, the teacher and the other students, they didn't like my questions. Oh, not at all. So, you know, it's like, well, let's talk about this. What happened to the natives? They don't mention the genocide. Oh, no. And so Nicoletta and I were talking about this, and so I had some California history in college, and I had a number of really, Manuel Macias at Cabrillo College, man, he was militant. He was a militant mother. Oh, man, he was Latin, and man, he just hated the white man. And all they had done, you know, to the natives, and I loved his passion, and just shocked by it, but loved it at the same time. And so she was talking about the Christians, back to this, like the duality of like, the Christians were really into self-flagellation at that time when Junipero Serra and the missionaries were coming over, the Spanish Catholics and whatnot, and, you know, like proving your sort of worthiness. And so self-flagellation and wearing, like on the Da Vinci Code, that one guy who got the Da Vinci Code that had dig the thing in deeper. And for some people, they're that numb. They literally need that much pain to help their soul come into their body because they're that disassociated. Believe me, you know, when there's degrees of possession too, this happens. And so it's like, wow, it takes that much but it takes that much pain for someone to change sometimes too, right?
Alice Miller explained it well. The writer Alice Miller, the way that from the 1500s, the pedagogy was you have to beat the hell out of children, literally beat the shit out of children, literally beat them until they shit into the toilet.
Okay.
Less than 6 months and all that.
Not too far down, like there was.
But just to say, it's how people got to the place where they needed pain.
So that was the viewpoint of consciousness at that time
Yeah.
in human history, right? Or the Jungian psychology. There was this, you know, the Kali Yuga stuff. Like this is dark Kali Yuga stuff, right? And so from their perspective, when they saw what the Indians were doing, because I read some of Junipero Serra's, you know, journal entries, and you know, he would say when he landed in Santa Barbara and saw the was it the Ohlone? No, Ohlone is up here. Chumash down there in Carpinteria. And he said they worked maybe at the most 3 to 4 hours a day. All the food they needed was in the ocean or in the creeks and on the, you know, they would just forage. And so that's the time they spent was gathering food or, you know, at a certain point of the day and hunting. And then he said most of the rest of the day was leisure time. And, you know, they had a primary partner, but some of them messed around and they had what he termed in his own journal an idyllic lifestyle. So I'm talking to Nicoletta about this, and I go, so it's interesting to me is like, if we label them savages and they have the idyllic lifestyle, and yet they were converted to our superior ways, and they're the savages. And I'm like, and so we were talking about the inversion. See, Nicoletta is really aware of what David Icke calls the great inversion. You know, what's good is bad, what's bad is good, and you know, the pedophilia and the satanic rituals and the Friends and the Seinfelds, you know, and all the Hollywood baloney. And well, that's because it's parasitic. It's parasitic consciousness, I call it. It feeds on fear. So our job is, you know, on some level, is there's just greater clarity and awareness in here. So again, the greater clarity and awareness means the dumbing down methods get stronger and stronger because it's a dualistic world. And so we can still take the journalistic perspective of, like, does the sky care what clouds are going through it? No. In my own experience, I can tell you that pure consciousness does not care what's going through it. Even pain is fascinating to a certain degree. So our job then as egos is to be able to surrender enough, as I was saying earlier, to be able to surrender enough to that where even the ego is seen as a cloud. Or even the one that thinks it's seeing, there's also something deeper that's seeing that. It's like, you know, you talk about octaves and musical. there's always sort of an octave deeper in consciousness. It's like deeper in the ocean. You can always go deeper in the water, because up on the surface is all this blah, 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 three-dimensional stuff, but then that's like sitting in silence brings us down into that. And that's where, and then men get a chance to view it through intimacy with women generally. And that's why the women, there's a point where there's a guy that'll get like different males, men will settle in. And I won't pick on just men, it happens to women too, but just because I've counseled so many women, and then they run away. In whatever ways a man, pushes away, is a jerk, starts to feel distant, starts spending time polishing the car versus spending time with her, lying, cheating. Examples, you guys all know. And I've heard this at least 1,000 times. And so in my own experience of studying, going down into silences, the initial level that you see, why am I bringing this up? Because this is all natural law again, of our internal process of, we all in this room are awakened and empathic. So there are certain parts like this where the gargoyles on the church, like you see on each side when you're going to a church in Europe, why are those two gargoyles there on either side of the steps going into the church? It's a great pointer at this.
It's supposed to be protection.
From what?
But they're demons.
Other demons.
I think they are demons.
What are the gargoyles protecting? Or are they protecting anything at all?
Symbolically protecting the church. Probably.
Oh, I just love it. This is the stuff, this is the essence of life right here. This is the essence of life right here. It is the study of this stuff, because there's these hidden messages buried in everywhere. The gargoyles. So I'm talking about the three-dimensional world and the world of duality. And what if the gargoyles are gatekeepers?
Yeah. Definitely.
They're gatekeepers to something like Stargate. I just love the Stargate stuff. And like, ooh, you can jump in this thing and end up in some other world and place and time. In Atari, there was a game. Remember, you could hit hyperspace. What was that game? It was like one of the first video games with the triangular ship, and you could maneuver it around. Asteroids, I think it was.
Yeah.
Asteroids.
Space
It was like hitting hyperspace, and then you could show up anywhere at any time, kind of thing.
Well, isn't there a guarding of like the deflecting the energy that you're going into a spiritual kind of realm, right? And so the gargoyles are guarding against that other outside energy coming in to that spiritual realm.
Okay, so remember the context too, because you're onto this. The context I brought in was the man gets to a certain level with the woman, and then there's a turning away and exiting. That's the context I'm talking about, this gargoyle thing, because the feminine is the portal, but not necessarily the gargoyles. Like Bernie and Jean actually call themselves now my gargoyles.
Oh, interesting.
They literally are. And I've been studying that, like, it's interesting. But again, there's a point where we get to a certain level of peace, love, satisfaction, joy, and abundance. And then generally in the Hendricks work, the book, The Big Leap specifically, they talk about where we get to this upper limit and then we sabotage ourselves to get back to our normal state of consciousness that we're familiar with. Dan Millman calls them gateways of release. Our container of energy gets to a certain level of comfort, and then our circuits blow, because in electricity, you have to have a certain gauge of wire to hold a certain level of current, right? Spiritually, we're the same way. That's why I think that book that I keep poking back at, Jana Dixon's piece, The Biology of Kundalini, I still think that anybody that can download that, even print it out at this point, it's one of the most brilliant works of, it's not perfect, but it's her attempt to channel the physiology of a spiritual awakening in a human and quantify it in various ways that I've never seen it done. And I've still never read the 200-page all the way through, which is, I'm a studier, and it's like, it's really deep. And I have to sit with like some things he's pointing at, or things like histamine, for example, is also a neurotransmitter.
Oh.
Fascinating. Like, without that insight from that book, I never would have been able to take a different perspective. So allergic states, according to her book, is a state of hyperkundalini. So that means a lot of fire burning. And so histamine is a way to sort of cool down the system. And then Bernard Jensen comes in, and there's this membrane in here, might be called the tympanic membrane. It separates the brain from, and that's why sometimes when there's a drip coming out through the nose. Anybody ever had allergies so bad where there's just a drip coming out?
Yeah.
Bernard Jensen calls that brain heat. Jensen calls that brain heat. Drip. I used to have it really bad. It would just drip, and there was no way to shut off the valve. I have to stuff Kleenex in there sometimes just to sleep.
Excuse me.
Bless you.
Thanks.
Speaking of allergies,
Excessive iodine.
pardon?
Excessive iodine causes excessive salivation, excessive nasal secretions also.
Well, iodine's a whole other story, because in terms of chemistry on the periodic table of the elements, it's the largest molecule that can get into our cells of all the elements. And it's so large, it actually requires a special escalator to get through the membrane. And that's why iodine deficiency is so common, and iodine, what I call thyroid hormone resistance, you can see on your hair mineral analysis. That's the calcium potassium ratio. That's why hair mineral analysis is so valuable. You can see insulin resistance, stress hormone resistance, thyroid hormone resistance, and the status of sort of the DHEA profile, whether they're in a state of degenerative, low DHEA or high, and that's the sodium potassium ratio and sodium magnesium ratio. Hey,
Yes, hello.
high fiver, Miles.
Hey, brother.
Yeah, man. The recording's going, so
Yeah.
be on good behavior.
Quick question, Craig. Why do you think men pull away?
Well, that's back to the gargoyles, and so this is like, to me, it's the edge of the seat moment, because there's these 1,000,000-to-1 conversations I've had I'm being guided not to name any names, so I'm gonna stick with that grace of the confidentiality discussion that you were a part of. Good catch. A few men I've had conversations with over the years of this kind of subtlety. So the man gets to I wanted Carol to hear this, so I was kind of pausing.
Sorry.
No, I just wanted you to be part of this, because I know that this is something that's on your radar. So there's a certain, in the silent retreat, there's a certain upwelling, a churning, like there's all kinds of various states of being that can happen. You've sat in some silence, haven't you? Right. So it can be a roller coaster. Like one meditation can be like completely and utterly blissful. And the next one could be like the pits of hell, like being poked with pitchforks and stuff, kind of feeling. And then the next one could be beatific and something in between. And then there's like a tractor going, and then obsessing about the tractor sound, about how I'll be happy when the tractor sound stops, which never stops. So I'm never happy. If you're caught in one of those loops, like you put conditional happiness out there, like I'll be happy at this future moment when these conditions are met. And sitting in silence is a great study of that, about how many conditions we put out there for ourselves. I'll be happy when, and then insert. I used to study it driving down to college on the 101 to San Luis Obispo. And I caught myself in this loop of, I'll be happy when I pass this slow driver. And if you're on a 3-hour drive, how many slow drivers are you going to run into? A couple hundred? It was like saying, I'll never be happy, right?
Right.
Sure.
So get back to the when men pull away.
Right, well, this is the same idea.
Okay.
So we get to a point of emptiness in silence, or with a woman, where a man and a woman, or even two women or two men, it doesn't have to be just an intimate, sexual relationship. And there's a turning away, because of the terror of the gargoyles represent what I have to surrender in myself to enter that silence. And that level of surrender is either inherently there or not. And the man knows it at that point. And instead of just the intimate thing to do, because I've had women tell me this, would be to out yourself at that moment and bring it out, right? And talk about it and explore it.
Yeah.
But because men are hooked up with so much programmed shame, they implode and run away. See? So you can have compassion for men, because they face that, they see that they're not equipped, because there's a point where you can't fake it anymore. And then you women know it. I got 18 months of grinding this out with Gene and Bernie, and I got to a point after a year where I said, you guys are having discussions about men, about things men aren't aware of that you're not telling the men. And they both went, oh yeah.
Women do.
Men don't want to talk about it. We have no
That's
choice.
Right.
You try and talk about it. and
Yeah.
I don't know
Right.
why I
We have to talk with each other.
Right. So I told them, I said, I want you guys to tell me. So, you know, it's like getting chiseled. It's like, if you don't want to let go of these pieces of your ego, then you ladies aren't going to carve away. Right. But I want to be better. And so, you know, my partner Noelle is that way. I mean, I told her, I go, you're the sculptor, so make me a better man. And because I was always willing. And it's to the ego, it's painful, like on some dramatic level, like when I'm in traffic. I mean, this goes back so far, this competitive part of me. Like if some guy in the fast lane going along Highway 1 gets on the slow lane and tries to pass me, and I'm already going 75 or 80. Well, then my competitive, like I watch this like how dare you?
No, I feel yeah.
And then my foot starts going down the accelerator. And then my favorite sinister thing to do is just box them out. So they have to slow down in the slow lane car, you know, full outage, you know. But see, that's where I'm when I became aware of it for the first time, I was just mortified, like, wow, I'm that competitive. And then now it's more like one of my teachers would say, what do you want to get out of any experience? Like if you're going to donate money to somebody, don't donate because you have compassion for them. Donate because of the good feeling it'll give you. Like be selfish in your donation. And if you don't feel like it's going to be good for you to give the money, then don't give the money. But make it more about you than what's outside of you. Like kill. And so again, it's like there's a point where you can fake it until you make it. But as you ladies know, there's a point where the guy knows. And so instead of doing the intimate thing, which would be, hey, I'm blocked right now. Because in improv theater, when you're stuck, you just talk about it, right? In improv work, just improv it.
Yeah.
But the shame button gets pushed and it's like implosion. And you guys want to talk about it. Because the ladies won't understand my shame. They don't want to hear about it. That's some guy's stories.
And they decide that without consulting.
Without consulting
Oh,
them.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's also because of conditioning that has us as men to where we don't feel like we can't be that open because it's viewed, if this is my terms, as you're being weak. You're being weak. You can't lead me. You're not strong. And we're expected to always be the strong, no matter what, warrior. And we have our vulnerability and our emotions just like anybody else.
But
then that's poked at because you're supposed to also be sweet and feminine and sensitive at the same time, and sit in front of a computer and be a slave to some other man's dream.
But expected by who to be powerful?
That's the programming that we've been indoctrinated with.
So, but still, just, can you break it down? Who you usually thought was expecting it of you?
Oh, any woman in my life, if I was intimate with her, dating with her.
And we would just like to say, it could be, it's possible that was every woman you were dating. It
Right.
wouldn't have been me.
Right.
Or me.
Yeah, so the
Right.
thing is that we know there are ways that men decide that
Without,
Consulting.
without
Yes.
consulting or
Without
being
including-
open to the conversation.
that's right,
Mhm.
they just cut them off.
And that's the worst, when anyone traps themselves in a belief that doesn't consult the one they believe is trapping them.
Yeah.
When that was not their intention.
Yeah.
Well, the feminine offers the
And
mirror.
sometimes we're not aware that we're doing that.
The pure feminine is sheer and utter darkness. The sheer masculine is a sheer and utter lightness. That's not a value judgment. It's just the way the dualistic world works, right?
Yeah.
So if it could happen with a lesbian couple, it could be a masculine partner and a feminine partner, and it could happen to the more masculine element would come in, because there's obviously going to be what do they call it? Like there's a butch and a, what's the other one? There's a butch and a
The lipstick. I think that's what I'm.
Femme.
Right.
A femme,
No more
a butch and a femme?
Lipstick.
Okay, a butch and a femme.
I thought that too, but-
I want to get the proper term, PC terminology here, you know, I gotta get it right.
The masculine, feminine, that doesn't mean male, female.
Right, exactly.
Exactly.
And
It's just,
Exactly.
it's really just an energy.
it's an energy.
Yeah.
And so if Carl comes in a vulnerable place, I can find my masculine part to make things better in a way. And if he's in super masculine, I don't try to go to masculine. And he'll dance it too. I noticed him recognizing and playing with it. And that's where you get a good relationship, if you're willing to both dance and be aware and care enough.
Exactly, yeah, be fluid in that conversation,
Yeah,
yeah.
for both parts.
Well, there's pointers that are like breadcrumbs, and Kirtana line in one of her songs is, one of her songs called Choose One. Because there are many faces that you see in your life, many lovers you'll have in your life. Why don't you just choose one? And this goes back to this assumption that we know what love is. And Adyashanti had a talk at Inner Light about this Chinese man he had met in one of his travels, and how he talked about how Americans are so stupid and how he could tell him why. He said, look at your divorce rate.
Yeah, that's.
Your divorce rate tells me all I need to know, that you know nothing about love.
That's right.
He goes, it only took me 10 years to love my wife. Only 10. He made that an emphasis, only 10. So they go in with the assumption of, let's explore and find out what love is, instead of, I know what it is and you're going to fulfill it.
Or was he matchmade?
Or you're never gonna.
He was match made.
Yeah.
And that was the debate about being in an arranged marriage. And my friend Shahid over in Africa, he's Islamic. And so, we're having conversations about, sort of business marriages and mistress marriages. And because in Islam, they believe in all that. And so, there's this, I have to release my own judgments about coming from the white view of the way the universe should be, right? It's one of those classic moments of freedom for me, because I'm looking at, wow, that's so weird, but from their perspective, we're weird.
Right.
So it's like, it's equal and opposite, right? So him and I are able to meet in the middle. And if there's curiosity,
Oh, yeah.
then that's openness. And then we have these 2 hours where it's like, we could go on for 12 hours and it would probably just wouldn't even faze us. But that's what we're trying to facilitate to the world, is because he sees this as like, the division that's been thrown into us is all this propaganda that my God's the only God and your God sucks and my God's a better God and I'm going to fight your territory. And, and that's what the media is still playing off on, that whole Ukraine thing. But that's just because COVID isn't working anymore. They need the next distraction. And all they're doing is cleaning up the Biden family, corruption around the world.
Thank you.
So, come on, anybody who's got half of a brain and looks into this a little bit can see what's going on. But, like, they're beating the drums of war because that's what they do. The rich bankers do to make more money, because war is money. And they're bankrupt, by the way. Fulford's been talking about this, that every quarter, basically the United States corporation is bankrupt and they have to go find a sponsor. So they beat the drums of war. So the next rich mofo will give them some money to fund the next quarter. But basically, the USA corporation is bankrupt, and it's a powerful bankrupt corporation. But what happens to bankrupt stuff that's dangerous, right? So, sorry to take us back. There's a certain let's get out of that one. Is spring came early this year because we had a lot of rain early, and so we're now in sort of the plants. It still feels like we're going to get some rain. Like, it seems like we're living a year in a month. And sometimes I feel like we're living a year in a week. Do you guys get that feeling? Like,
Oh, yeah.
it's like this compression of time, the acceleration of time into this portal where it's going to go and expand outward again. That's what it feels like. And so this spring might be, like Jean up on the mountain has said that she and the other guy living up there, where it's you get the broad expansive view up on the property. That's why we wanted to try and build something up there, was orbs and different kinds of lights and ships that are, my friend Mark, who's Navy veteran, his son, who wasn't a believer, Mark, but he was working out on the Monterey Wharf for a few years, and then there's those clear summer nights or clear nights he had to sit outside and sort of be a watchman outside. And so he had a lot of time to see the sky. And he said, after a few months, he said, Dad, I believe you now. I'm seeing impossible 90-degree turns with lights in the sky, like where it would just be impossible for a normal flight path to do that. And Mark has a photograph of 3 orbs above his house, actually 3 white orbs, which is the classic triangular craft, the cloaked craft that you see the X-Files loosely refer to, which, Chris Carter did say that part of that was disclosure X-Files, because he was Area 51 kind of top secret. Some of his more lesser known interviews, that's what he basically confesses, that the X-Files is in part disclosure. But just don't tell you which parts are, which parts aren't, because there's a whole horror element to it. So they keep the powers that be kind of off balance with that show, which I kind of like.
So, this thing with the divorce rate.
Oh, back to love. Okay, so the exploration of what love is, and like in our culture, we have sort of this, we haven't studied, this is what I call the subtle sciences and the distinction of how we bring into consciousness and through words what we're experiencing internally and all these different forms of love. It's like the classic young man, if a woman has some love for a man, but it's not sexual, often young men will perceive that as, oh, she's got the hots for me and I want to hump her. But it's a misperception because he hasn't studied the subtlety of what the different forms of love are, right? And basically, like massage in our culture basically means foreplay to sex. It was a long, when I was a kid, downtown Santa Cruz, where New Leaf is now, was a bank once. On the corner there, before they built the parking structure, was a massage parlor. In quotes. On the upper floor, the second floor. But you have to be an old timer like me to remember that.
Mere fact, it was called parlor. You needed to question what the first word was.
Parlay.
So don't you think also the issue, I think, in this country is oftentimes the relationships based around things, things we're going to acquire, and which, especially if you're building a home, or that's nice because you're putting your energy into it, but it's a lot of things and there's a lot of distraction. And instead of being based on this kind of a spiritual commonality, where you spend time, say, doing a little meditation in the morning together and coming together in that other higher place rather than here. And we just don't really have it that much in this country, where they do in other traditions.
Right, we're seeing it emerging here because, so when you're talking about, by the way, I have to sort of repeat what you say again, because the people in the video, and you have a quiet voice tonight. So, so prompt me again and rephrase, because I want to make sure the audience gets the gist of it. So we were sort of programmed into, and then go from there.
Okay, so that in this country, more or less, our relationship, I think, is based on things,
Okay.
acquiring things.
So
versus
let me just repeat that. That was the prompt I needed. So what Joanne was saying was that, in the United States, the relationship is based on things and an acquisition of things, acquiring of things, right?
Yeah.
And we even got, and so one of my teachers would go so far as to say, we even try to acquire enlightenment. We're that distorted. We think that enlightenment is something we can acquire as an ego. I'm going to put on my golden enlightenment hat, right? So that's the gist of it, right? If we could just summarize it quickly.
And also a lot of distractions.
And distractions.
Everybody's very distracted with.
And what do distractions do to the present moment? If you're trying to focus,
You're not here now.
you're not able to focus, right? But so that's what I call, they got something for everybody. Like, the fiends that have been running this whole realm. They got something for everybody to trigger almost, right? They got something for everybody. They can trigger anybody in today's world. They got chemtrails. You got something for everybody, to trigger any soul.
Dopamine hits.
There you go. Yeah, ultimately depleting. So on lab work, the way you can study that is actually you look at the ratio of DHEA to cortisol, and you'll see this pattern where in the initial phase, the DHEA will be high, but then the cortisol will be high. And on hair mineral analysis, that will be a high sodium potassium ratio. That's why you don't need lab work in my world. You can just do a hair mineral analysis every now and then, and you get a quick study in that basic $35 lab work that's I still can't believe this is $35 in life extension. I probably shouldn't even talk about it on the air here. I'll probably eliminate it, but it's like there's other companies doing the same thing. So it's just this wave of third party, because the medical system has just been seen through by enough people now that people like me can just come in and like, I mean, to this day, every piece of lab work that a member, I guess I'd say member now, not a client, a member comes in with, someone in need comes in with, they'll say, the doctor says it's fine, it's all within the reference ranges. Now, what are the medical reference ranges, my folks? What do you think the medical reference ranges are? Or-
Not sick enough yet. Let them get sicker so we can make a lot more money.
So on the bell curve statistical thing, it's like out on the fringe, right? So when you lose about 90% of that organ's function, then come talk to us. That's basically what they're saying. And all the signals in between. So I come in with like, well, what about the calcium phosphorus ratio? Oh, you never heard of that? Well, they used to do that to measure the thyroid function. A high calcium phosphorus ratio meant hypothyroid. A low calcium phosphorus ratio meant hyperthyroid and problems with the parathyroid. So tell me, Mr. Fancy Doctor, what about the anabolic markers of the blood work? Do you know what those are? If you want to do fertility work, you better know what proper anabolic markers are so a woman can raise a child. Don't you want to know that? You don't know any of this. But see, my freakish practice was full of friends that didn't trust the medical system. So, hey, Craig, will you help my wife through pregnancy even though you don't know anything about it? When I was starting out, I'm like, oh, no pressure. It's new life in the world. And, you're putting the responsibility of nutrition for me. And shit, let me get my pregnancy stuff out, and all the old college books, bringing it in. And like, wow, now on the other side of it, 25, 30 years later, it's like, wow, I'm glad I did that stuff because I got all the stories to tell. And the natives went so far as if a couple was going to conceive, this one tribe in Africa, if a couple was going to conceive, they would announce it sort of a year ahead of time. And they were fed the best food in the tribe and the most raw proteins and, the elephant genitals or whatever they do, buffalo, testicles, whatever, and whatever special organs they were into and whatever special herbs and shamanic practices and energy works and Reikis. And so, and then the women were so powerful and the men were so powerful that they would consciously conceive, they knew like, okay, we're ovulating now. And generally, this is a really interesting observation that was brought to me by one of my teachers in sort of upper level gynecologies in terms of the sun and the moon cycle is the woman who's here to conceive a child will ovulate on the full moon and bleed on the new moon. A woman who's here spiritually will do the opposite for spiritual reasons. It's an interesting observation this one teacher of mine had.
Wow.
He was really high level. I mean, he was working I can't even name his name. I don't even want it said, but he was the first teacher about 30 years ago when I was in my herb studies with Michael Tierra that he gave me the confidence to go into women's issues because, as a man in his late 20s, and it was like playing with a whole new map of your women's gynecology stuff, so terrified. Like, what if I make a mistake? The shame button. Then my unlovableness will come out if I can't help them figure out their gynecological problems.
When she bleed on the new? When she bleed on the new one?
So the woman that's here to conceive would bleed on the new moon because the theory behind it was the woman goes into there's a hormonal surge right about ovulation, right prior to it. There's a surge of testosterone and FSH and LH, I believe, follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. And so there's a big burden on the liver because the liver hormones are supposed to do a very quick job and the liver is supposed to break them down immediately. And what happens in people these days is the hormones don't get broken down fast enough and they keep recirculating. Like this man I had as a new client today, he wanted to show me what happened after all the abdominal surgeries and he had cherry hemangiomas, little tiny red spots. And so I'm like, well, that's they call that heat in Chinese medicine, like heat spots, right? Red spots coming out. But the standard process people and their doctors went another level with it and identified it as estrogen stress coming out, unmetabolized estrogen.
For a lot of hormone disruptors.
Yeah, exactly. And in some cases, it could be if there's a testosterone issue, then you'll see the dark hair on the woman. when there's a testosterone imbalance. Especially if it occurs when normally where there's light hair on the woman's body and it starts to turn dark, then you know that something's happening with testosterone metabolism. But I digress. So yeah, there's a big hormonal surge there. And so the woman, it's like the full moon, it's romantic, right? It's romantic to make love under the full moon versus when there's no moon, it's kind of scary. More open because I can see what's around me on the full moon, on the hilltop in the meadow, making love versus, you know, in this dark, hearing sounds in the scary night while I'm naked with some man, you know, that, and there's just, I don't even know what's around me, you know, it's got a big fire rolling or something, right? So, but the opposite would be the spiritual woman that's not here to conceive necessarily, she's letting go on the full moon to let the spiritual light in. Versus the moonlight is when she's she's bleeding on the full moon, excuse me, and ovulating on the new moon. Yeah, so she's bleeding during the time of the most light, right? And the lunar light, which is the more feminine light, right? The sun, the solar was yang and the moon was yin in that duality. Kind of complicated because the sun and the moon aren't the only thing in existence. So are they, you know, moonlight is softer than sunlight generally. Like
It's
you could,
reflecting sunlight.
right? It's like
Still
a
sunlight,
mirror.
but it's reflecting.
Okay, so I gotta go back to 925 here to start winding this down. Oh, I got it. So this time of year, then just say you live in a colder climate, because I mean, look at California right now. I mean, look, there's still no rain for 10 days except past. I look at my forecast chart and it's like up Shasta and north, there's a couple of days of rain in the next 10, but around here, no hope. And so I look at that and I go, wow, so there's this spring energy, but if you live in a colder climate, then this is when the plants are starting to grow and all the stuff you had in the root cellars is running out. And it's the Lent. This is the letting go time of all the heavier foods to get the blood ready for the warmer weather. This is the time of transition. It's generally when you see more illnesses is in the spring and the fall, because that's when you can imagine you're in, you know, I love the romantic notions. I have this, Nicolette and I were talking about this because her and her husband have land up in Idaho. So they own land up there, but they're probably going to sell it because she's running into the reality of actually living in -20 wind chill for 3 or 4 months out of the year and snow on the ground. And she's like, that the blood quality has to change for that. That's why salmon have the EFAs in their blood to keep their blood thin in the freezing cold weather. So you change the motor oil in your car when it's cold out, right? To a thinner?
Yeah.
A thinner motor oil. So then in the hotter weather, you have a thicker motor oil, right? But the body's doing the same thing with the quality of the blood, the viscosity. And that's what spring and fall are about, is the more toxic and out of balance you are, as the sponge gets squeezed, so to speak, the more crap comes out the sponge. So to me, like, you know, the need to shower is one of my personal ones. Like, you know, I think I went 7 or 8 days without a shower in this movie. Just was like, suddenly I realized, like, no wonder I'm so stagnant in my consciousness, because I'm stagnant in my skin and body. So I showered and it was like this liberation. But I didn't feel that right, but I wasn't getting comments from other people. So I was like, wow, 7 or 8 days that I've been moving. It's like, I'm doing pretty good. Because on that, you know, an enema a week is a baseline. And then during cleansing, I was doing more enemas. And I had a story running that I needed to catch up with my detox. And then I started taking the zeolite from Center Process. And I'm like, exactly the claims I read about zeolite is what I'm seeing playing out. Like, I had coffee 3 days in a row. It was the medium air roasted enema coffee that one of my clients left in a box, and I found it the other day. I was like, oh man, this is evil. I shouldn't be doing this, but okay, I'll have a cup. And I mixed it in with the dandelion caramel nut tocino. It was like one of those raw cream and honey. It was one of those, oh my God, moments, and cardamom essential oil. Yeah, so we were talking about cardamom a little bit, and how in Ayurveda, it sort of sharpens consciousness. So, you know, that's what working with a guy like Shahid is like. Being sharp is like being able to meet. Like what I'm here to do is to tie together these loose ends for people, and then it elevates the conversation to the next level. Like when Carl shows up, it's like, well, what about this and this? And then he goes, ooh, and then, blah, blah, and then I go, well, what about that and that? And oh yeah, and then that could, you know. Because another one of those spiders appeared the other day. These little jumping spiders, they come into my backpacks and they start weaving a web and making a home. And this client, it's one of just so many weird stories of my life. A bigger version of the same spider, I had my hydrogen water machine on and running, and this woman's in the cannulus, the part that goes in the nose. The cannulus was on her nose, and we were putting hydrogen gas into her, getting her head all clear because she had a pain behind her eyes. And I'm like, oh, this is a perfect thing for the pain behind the eyes. It's going to hydrate all the tissue back there. And then it went through its first cycle of a half hour, and it was off for a second. And then this spider comes out of, I don't know where it came from, and it jumps onto the hose on the hydrogen machine, the little plastic tube. It jumps on there, and it starts doing this dance in front of me and this girl. It's all, and I'm like, looking at each other like, what is going on? And so it was running around the machine, like trying to find where it wanted to, and we didn't know. It was like, what is it doing? And I realized, well, it had just made hydrogen gas, first of all. And so it had some frequency associated with it that drew the spider to it. It must have. Why would the spider be on top of the darn thing? I'm like, okay. And then this insight comes in, like, well, nanotechnology. I go, what if there's a camera inside this spider? And it's actually a nanobot. You never know. It was like this big, the size of a dime, maybe less. And I was like, there's a horrifying insight, and she's like, oh, let's not talk about that. I'm like, yeah, it's just, but it proceeded to do the strangest thing I've ever, it's like it knew we were there, and it was all, it would look up and go, and then it would look down and look for like something on the ground, and then we come up again and we start talking about it, and then it knew we were talking about it and come and face us again and go, I'm gonna go back around. And we were just like, for 15 good minutes, it had our attention. We're like,
Wow, the spider dates.
and then it finally jumped. It was like this moment where it was like on a ledge this high, and it's going to jump down to this next level because if you think about the hoses of this machine, they're kind of like branches of a tree.
Yeah.
They spin their webs in the tree, right? So we're thinking like, oh, maybe it's going to try and spin a web there. And so it jumped down to one level, and it looks up at us again, sitting there. It jumped down another level to a lower hose, and this goes all the way back 30 years to a spider that same location made a web as its home in my backpack in Western Massachusetts, up at the Kushi Institute, Smackerback Institute. That's when I first started noticing, like, so what are spiders in the larger scheme of things? The web of life. And so one of my roles here, especially in this area, is to weave people together in a web, right? And I'm seeing it playing out just by the Burma Street storage, and running into the owner of the property that I prayed for the angels to see, for a week, and then they're materializing before my very eyes. The 30 seconds could have gone by, I would have missed the guy. It's just one of those like chess player in the sky moments. And if we put our order in on the wheel of God, then, so I guess my plug then, this will make Shahid happy, is in natural law. It's like, that's without knowing it, that I was studying the laws of the universe, because I thought it was just natural for a human to want to learn about how to live in alignment with the laws of the universe. It seemed like the common sense thing to do my entire life. So I'm 56 now. I'm going like, I've pretty much been awake since I was 6. So I pretty much got a PhD in life process. So let's put it into a package, natural law, and then stop trying to rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic and turn inward, because then the world will change quite naturally in an uncontrived way, because an awakened soul would not be doing the things that people are doing if they were an awakened soul, because there would be more empathy and less gaslighting and game playing. So that's the point of why we're doing what we're doing. Is the little plug, my elevator speech is natural laws, 3 main things. It's who am I and how do I fit into the larger scheme of life? What's my canvas of consciousness? In other words, am I even aware that there's a canvas that's empty, and then I'm always painting it without even knowing it, often unconsciously. So the marker of consciousness that we never finished, that I'll finish at the end here, is natural laws, the understanding that in day-to-day life, to be awake means we're either choosing consciously, or we're so in the flow that we don't need to choose, but we're aware that we're in the flow, but we're not trying to pull ourselves out of the flow necessarily. In other words, inventing a problem when there isn't one. And that if upon reflection, we hear that we did something unconscious and we didn't realize we did it, then we can have the humility to repent and process. Like my first check-in with the Mankind Project with the elders, in a 5 to 10 minute check-in, I said 5 things I don't remember saying that were very shadowy, quote. And I was mortified. It was about 10 years ago, it's the most humbling moment of my life to sit in front of these elders. I'm going, yeah, you said 5 shadowy things, dude. I'm like, but I don't remember saying 5 shadowy things. That's asleep at the wheel, right? Because I didn't even, it was a stream of consciousness that I was unconscious to. It blurted out of my mouth, and it was some repressed memory, probably that. But that's the beauty of, that's where the woman, the partnership comes in, right? And the partner reflects that back to us. In this case, the group, and you got 10 eyes staring at you of sort of master elders. It's like, okay, let's hear it. You said this, this, and this, and you said this, this, and this, and so that's what natural law is being able to face the truth too. You know, who am I and what am I doing? Well, you know, there's a blind spots. We all got them. So why not explore the blind spots and make them conscious? That's the whole Jungian psychology thing anyway, making the darkness conscious. And then the other part's about how do I nourish this earth suit, which I like to call the earth suit's the sacred vessel of the soul. So this is my interface. So how do I nourish it? Those are the 4 foundations of health and the chooser. And then there's the game, the legal game and the word game and the authority game and the fear game and the layers of consciousness game and the repressed trauma game and the gaslighting game and the sabotage game and the fake bad food game and the scamdemic games, and there's been more than one. And so the part is being able to see, because triggers will be presented, like, you know, what triggers your fear? That's where the personal law profile is a part of the element of, that's the bridge between the personal and the relationships with the outer world, is we develop our personal law profile. You were in it. You guys were in it, right? I pulled up another one. I'm looking back at what we were doing and from the perspective now, and it's like, I'm not right to what are my triggers when I'm on the edge? And they're still pretty much the same. There's a little bit of improvement though. You know, to humbly look and go, you know, I'm a little better this time through this stressful period because I had Jean and Bernie by my side. I didn't feel like I was alone in this move. The last move, I definitely didn't feel alone into the house we're in now. But see, that's the community backing that keeps us, and that's what the game is about, is to pick us off separately, because we're more easily picked off separately than in a group. Right? You have your little, like the empty cities in China. You've all heard about these big cities that are just empty.
Nobody's looking.
Well, what do you think? They're in their wet dream game. That's the ultimate game for them. They put you in a little box with 5G around you and controlling frequencies, and you're constantly monitored and checked on, and you know, you're a slave in their little corporation. And you know, that's the end game of this sort of sinister satanic dream, and completely controllable. And the children are all, you know, pawns in their game, programmed. And so, you know, that's one half of the duality. Natural law is understanding that game and having the fortitude to be able to just take a look, and then to your degree of being able to stomach it. Remember the stomach gallbladder thing? Stomach gallbladder energy? That's a common pattern. Stomach, gallbladder, bladder. My body work, I just see it all the time. On the deeper layer, the kidney yang, I've been seeing that, you know, the pericardium, kidney yang, and triple warmer, like energy distribution. And that's kind of what the disruption of the aberrant frequencies is causing though, right? The distribution of energy throughout the body is being disharmonized, which is why, again, you know, natural laws about, maybe I just need to do a few arm swings and a few leg swings and a few alternate nostrils and tapping the shoulders, you know, and, oh, 3-minute miracle. I feel so much better just being back in my body than up in this freaking thinking thing we call mind. So one of the other goals is to be able to write a notice, because I had some experience with the planning department of Santa Cruz and was able to fight off one of their evil minions with just a simple notice. Oh, you won't sign my notice? Well, you don't get entry to my domicile then. Bye. And there was threats of follow-up, but there was no follow-up because we have him on film lying twice in the video, me and Bernie and Dave. So it's just that kind of, so I got to face that fear of authority, right? Oh, the authority figure is going to take my power away. Because what does authority mean? You guys remember from the class? Remember what the root of the word authority? What the root of the word authority is? You guys remember?
Author.
Author. And what's the root of author? Oh, it's so good. What is the author doing?
Writing a script.
He's creating. Creator is the root of author. So authority then, to me, means we're taking your creative powers away. Right? Or stealing your authorship. That's pretty deep. So learning that though, being able to process it, process our should about the way it should be, still try to build a better future with our vision and positivity. And then the last three groups are more about, how does kind of natural law work when we're in these higher states of being and more aligned? And how does that fit in with nature? And then how can my chooser help other people, kind of thing, which is the natural overflow of agape anyways. So in a nutshell, anybody that goes through natural law is eligible to lead a natural law group. And so I have it set up with a dashboard at this point where it'll end up being on Thinkific, I think, which I want money for my plug of you guys, Thinkific, have it as a digital learning platform. And in an interactive way though, because there's only so far we're going to get doing a class like natural law on our own, right? You guys who went through it. I mean, it requires at least 2 people. I would say 4 would be minimum for a natural law group, but you guys could all lead a group if you wanted to. It's all available on the Google Drive. You click in, use the resources, and there's going to be commissions for that because the dream is like, this is a pyramid scheme. So we got the first group done. Now the first group is 6 to 8 people, but now 6 to 8 people takes 6 to 8 people more, and the pyramid sort of goes down, and then the awakening starts. And then we have this natural law critical mass sort of thing, because there's because of what Shahid's done, I can go on Google Analytics now and see there's people that it was very limited. Most of the United States was the readership of my website and my work. And now there's all this Pakistan and Sri Lanka and Gambia and Africa. And it was, my work was, a lot of it was suppressed. Facebook told me so. I was never kicked off or put on timeouts on Facebook, but I was told by these pop-ups that we're going to suppress your audience if you post this. I would post it anyway, F you, so nobody would see it. So I found ways around that. That's why some of you guys still see my stuff and some of you don't, because that's part of what Shahid has done now. He went into the back door of Google and the back door of Facebook and the back door of all these social media organizations. And he basically spiderwebbed Health Alchemy, basically at the top of the search engines. And so the level, it's already just seeing the bell curve of audience going up. And that part of that's, he understands people around the world, the awakening has gotten that strong that, most of the world doesn't see America as evil. They just see the American government as evil. That's what I'm getting the feedback from around the world. The Americans are kind of well beloved. So that's what we're trying to bring back, is this sense of community and the inner process of awakening. And then, people don't generally get drowsy and feel tired unless they feel safe and comfortable. And that's one of the words that's sort of lost in the world these days, is welcome. And feeling welcome. So that's what we're here to bring. The Hawaiians call it aloha. In Spanish, I love the mi casa es su casa. My house is your house. So to me, hotels and motels are a sign of a sick society. Why don't people just put each other up? Isn't it more fun to stay with somebody? Unless you're in a hurry and you want to have some privacy, but that's the purpose of the hotel motel. But my ancestors, that's what they did in Ireland. So that's what I'm doing here. That's what we're here to share is, I'm fine to stand up here. And I feel like I can be vulnerable because I got nothing to hide. You want to know something about me, just ask. I've done my share of dumb stuff, but so And the last part of natural law is like there's a cleansing element of we take stuff in and we get it out. And generally the big problem that this is kind of review is iron and oxygen metabolism. I'm just telling these new clients that a lot of what, this guy today was aware of the conspiracies going on. And I said, well, there's another conspiracy with the COVID recommendations because those are blocking magnesium and copper metabolism, zinc, ascorbic acid, vitamin D3, even not ivermectin, but HCQ to a certain degree. And so long-term, they're great for short-term because they're drug-like. So you use them for the short-term and take them for what they are. In the long run, you go back to what Monica had today. Monica had real vitamin C today. We picked these gynostemma leaves today that she ate with this chocolate mint leaves, this chocolate mint plant that I have. It's very strong, right?
Yeah, totally agree.
But the leaves were not in existence yesterday. These leaves grew in one day. That's vitamin C. It was like, sound effects definitely included. And then so D3, what are they saying when they say, they're saying freaking sunlight. I always knew that as a kid when I was sick, just get a few minutes outside. You can get some fresh air. And then what's the other one? D3, ascorbic acid, D3, zinc. Okay, so what's zinc come in naturally? Usually zinc is paired with copper in most of the rich animal proteins. So meat, shellfish, liver is considered the top notch though for copper. So nuts and seeds have a good zinc copper balance. Brazil nuts are really underrated too, by the way. They're high in selenium. Like, oh my God, Brazil nuts are delicious and they're very underrated as a nutritional powerhouse. That's one that definitely I try to get people to is Brazil nuts because you can get your daily dose of selenium from like 6 or 7 Brazil nuts. Pretty impressive. So it's these little buried hidden secrets have been kept from us, like in the fact that white flour and white sugar were supposed to have a cancer-causing label on food back in 1906. The Pure Food and Drug Act that was never advertised mainstream, and so that's the final part of cleansing allows us to see more clearly if we don't over cleanse. We can over cleanse, and that's what I wish we would have done more Raglan's tests in your case. Then we would have known, like, let's stop. But we weren't doing good, probably proper good follow-up. And in my case too, like I was moving, trying to start that cleanse, and then I got a good 10 days into the 21 days, and then it was like one day we'd worked all day moving, and then the Watsonville Staff of Life, and we were in that store, and we were hungry, and we had used cannabis, so it was like it was literally an orgy of just buying delicious foods and then making it up on the land. And that's where one of my teachers would say, everything in moderation, including moderation.
Every now and then, go.
His name was, I actually wouldn't mind his name. His name was Nam Singh, and he was the chef for Michael Tierra's spring retreats at the Quaker Center in the 90s. And Nam had a teacher that, quote, never left the mountains, like Huashan up in the Chinese, in the mountains of China. And he would never let anyone cook for him that, quote, wasn't a high-level adept or student of spirituality, because he knew the energy that the person making the food was as important as the food itself. So that was the quote from his teacher was, everything in moderation, including moderation. So there's those moments that you just have to surrender. And that's part of spring is opening up to more light, right? We're in the dark time of year. So we're going to, I really got the audience good tonight. Even,
Ask a question about.
do you want to have it on tape or off tape? Because I'm going to turn the tape off. You want to ask your question on the recording or off the recording? So I'm going to turn off the recording.
I think on the recording.
You want on the recording? Okay.
So liver seems to be eating liver, I don't know, the organic raw liver, and I've always thought that if you're eating the liver, even if it's organic from, an organic source, you're eating somebody's filter system. You're eating all that caca, even if it's organic.
Okay, that's the thought process I used to have. Okay, so let's talk about that. So her questions about the liver, being a filter. That's part of the brainwashing of how we've been conceptualizing liver function. It's one of its functions to be a filter, but it's not a seed kind of filter. So Shahid and I had this conversation today, and I'm glad you asked this question. It's late, but 10 to 10, but which is really a good study of. So transmutation versus transformation. Shahid gave me this distinction today. It was really interesting. So there's transformation versus transmutation. So transmutation is to take silica and transmute it to calcium. That's what chickens and cows do. They eat silica-rich grass, their gut bacteria eats it, and then transmutes the silica to calcium.
What's mute mean? Besides, can't speak.
Transmute. I don't think it's the same kind of mute. I think it's just part of the whole transmute word. We could, let's dictionary would get a, this could be a good, hey, on YouTube comments, let's transmute. Now let's see if anybody watched this far along. That would be a good YouTube comment request. So transformation, transmutation. So here's a good example is seaweed in the ocean's transmuter. So it takes some of the undesirable elements in the ocean and transmutes it to less undesirable elements, but doesn't retain the elements that it transmuted in the first place. It's like a magician, transforms it, moves along. So it's part of this paradigm that we're still stuck in, of this universe of, what's the science word for it? There's an old word for this of the laws of like the laws of thermodynamics, and everything goes into entropy. But it's actually the opposite. Nature takes chaos and organizes it. We've been taught the opposite. So what that boils down to is a lack of trust, ultimately, to me. So I know, because I've spent my career studying who's getting results and then backtracking why from there. It didn't matter what it was. If I heard somebody's getting results like this PEMF this PMF mat by Miramate, I'm working, and the hydrogen cell machine from, I give a plug that guy, George Wiseman, and the Aqua 50. Didn't want to plug him. He's awesome. And so, well, I just read 100 testimonials of various conditions being cured. So what do they all have in common, right? And then I see the Atkins diet, and I see, well, this type of person's getting results. How do I type that person? And this person here, when I put the acupoints, large intestine 4 with liver 3 and this other combination of points, it helps a certain type of condition in person, right? So the liver, then it takes in, so there's a couple of functions of the liver. So one of the things is the portal veins from the intestines, all the juices come up and they end up back in the liver to be processed and purified to go out into the bloodstream next. That's all, everything besides fat. That's where it's going. And then fat goes up through the lymph system and gets dumped out up here near the heart. And that's why there's more heart attacks after a fatty meal, is because all that fat goes in the lymph system, and the person who has a fast moving lymph system is going to get those triglycerides are going to elevate in the bloodstream, which is the fat. And then what happens when you add fat to water? It gets thicker. It's harder to pump around. But the liver is taking those elements and it's transmuting them. And there's little cells in there, they're called Kupffer cells. And I have a little slide for it. They're quite cute. They have a little cute little slide of this, an animated, little Pac-Man, KUPPFFER or something, like Kupffer cells. And they're like the little powerhouses that take in the toxins and literally transmute them. And there's no more toxin. And how do I know this? Is because, well, I studied these cancer diets, like the Gerson cancer diet. So they were doing liver juice every day. Liver juice, wheatgrass juice, coffee enema was one of the main formulas for Max Gerson's that version of the Gerson diet in the 30s. Incredible results. They poisoned him with arsenic and he lived, and then they poisoned him again and he died. So then his daughter took over the work, and they're down in Tijuana now, I believe. And they altered things a little bit, but generally with deep cancer, you do want to avoid animal protein for a while the body's trying to get healthy again. But there's a type of person, you got to get animal protein back in them or they won't recover. Believe me, I got 35 years of cancer to prove it. There's a deficient type that if you don't get some animal protein in them at some point after their cancer recovery, they're not going to gain weight and they're not going to get back to optimal function. That's your protein type. Your blood type O protein type, is a bad vegan, especially in a cold climate. So liver, just from seeing like that, and then today, for example, Joanne, I had I bought the frozen 16-ounce tub of chicken livers from New Leaf from Organic Pastures or whatever, like the ones you guys bring once in a while. And I thawed them out, and then I marinated them in teriyaki sauce, basically from my recipe favorites. And you know, I don't say I enjoy them, but every time I eat these little livers, my energy skyrockets. Just went. I'm like, and that's the marker I give people, right? If your energy is higher an hour after you eat, then please do more of that. I don't like liver, but my energy is higher, and it's like, well, eat to live, don't live to eat, guy. So I'm having teriyaki marinated chicken liver. I got 2 more servings of it sitting over there, and believe me, part of me is like, oh. You know, so today, to counteract that, I got a croissant.
Were they raw?
To appease the other part, you know, I better appease this other part because he's not happy with the raw liver, you know.
So was that raw, not cooked?
This is just gulp, like sliding it down in teriyaki sauce. Bye, Dean. Thanks for staying so late. All right, folks, does that answer your question to your satisfaction?
Sorry. I
Is
have
that
to follow on.
what we've been taught about the liver as a seed and full of toxins is not true at all,
There
basically.
is some part of the kidney you shouldn't eat. Because
I'm
kidney's
sure.
Different,
Kidney's different beast entirely.
but I don't know.
But there are, you know, if you have a non-organic cow liver living out on Harris Ranch off the Highway 5, you probably don't want to eat that cow liver. Probably not. You wouldn't want one of those. Yeah, you wouldn't want one of those cow livers, right? So it's qualified, you know, a healthy animal, blah, blah.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. So now if you're living like, but where liver's not appropriate, is say you're living down in Costa Rica and it's 95 degrees and 95 humidity, big, strong animal proteins like that's the last thing you want. So then you might do a fish liver. You might do a fish liver in that climate, right?
Fish head soup.
Fish head soup, because fish is lighter fat fare, and you don't want a lot of fat in your bloodstream when it's 95 degrees and 95% relative humidity. Believe me, that's what Shahid is living in. So we have these discussions, you know, I'm out here and, you know, he's talking about 45 degrees Celsius. And I'm like, what does that translate as? Like 110? Like, I'm like 45. So I can't imagine even 25 Celsius is hot for us.
Yeah.
So you're saying raw liver, not cooked liver?
Okay, so let's qualify that then. So the most ideal, my findings are, this is my report card back, is the best findings are for eating raw meat versus cooked meat. And 100 years ago, that's why they called arthritis cooked food disease. Because most of your connective tissue is made of protein, and they don't teach us that. They talk about calcium, 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 and more calcium, and calcium isn't calcium that. Calcium. Well, it turns out our bones are 1/3 minerals, of which calcium's a part, loosely 1/3 protein, and the rest water. But we're not taught that, Joanne, are we? I learned all this because of the standard process doctors and their collaborative work over the last 90 years with the company and Royal League. Like the study groups and mastermind groups. And I'm so grateful. Like what I'm leading, I'm just passing on what I got over the last 13 years, mostly for free, because they liked me and I liked them. I love the idea of a 1,000-acre farm. It's all doing permaculture. And, you know, they're doing raw food dehydrated in a vacuum. What can you argue with there? There's nothing really you can argue with. Like, what's wrong with all that? And then they're concentrating it down in this vacuum chamber. So you can get a tablet of beets, or you can get 5 SP green food tablets that are equivalent to a small salad when you're traveling. So what do I travel with? SP green food. Because 5 capsules breaks down into a concentrated salad of some sort. And people who use that have better bowel movements than people who don't use that generally. That's my other report card. So, you know, when you're traveling, one of the reasons we generally constipate more is because we're not usually getting enough vegetables and greens. So yeah, the cooked protein is damaged. And so if you're putting replacement parts in your car, are you going to put used damaged replacement parts in your car? But we're doing it in our body. If you want proof, you can study the primal diet, wewantTolive.com. That's Agenus von der Planet's work called the Primal Diet. And in his book, We Want to Live, is about his son. It's quite a story, medical nightmare down in Beverly Hills. And he found out some things, and he championed raw meat. And he was given I might be exaggerating, but I'm pretty sure I'm on the order of magnitude. I'll just lower it. 360, no, it's 465 cancer patients considered terminal, which means they were diagnosed by 3 doctors that they were going to die within, like 3 months to a year. And what got my attention was 461 of those 465 lived well beyond 5 to 10 years on his raw meat, raw vegetable, primal diet program. So that's raw protein. And, I talked to Shahid he's out in the Gambia, and he grew up on a farm in Dubai. And, raw meat is just something that in America we're brainwashed out of. We eat the muscle meat, but the muscle meat, the natives all knew, like we were talking about the lions and the cheetahs and the hierarchy and the nature. And that when an animal is killed and a lion comes over, the lion gets first crack. And what do you think the lion's eating? All the organs that are the most nutritious. And then the next predator comes along and eats whatever it gets secondarily. And then the muscle meat was always eaten last as the least nutritious part of the animal. And we're taught the opposite. The organs are gross and bad for you, and not this part and that part. But it's okay to have the leg or the shoulder or the ass, but not the liver. It's just almost absurd how programmed we are. So it's okay to have cooked protein. So the order of magnitude, if you're going to cook your protein, then is cook it in watery medium, and it's less damaging to the protein matrix. So stew, soup, simmer, braising in the oven. You have it, like if you cook a duck in the oven, I like to put it in some liquid and brine in it. So then it stays more moist because of the braising. Yeah.
Is that why the people with the lowest lifespans live in the South when they fry all their food?
Yes, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Because fried oils become polymers. They become more like a petrochemical. Remember the flax oil, linseed oil metaphor I've told you guys about a few times? So when you overheat oils and you're putting these polymers into the body, the liver just goes, what the F? And that starts thickening the bile. And we talk about congealed mucus, right, in Chinese medicine. That's all a gallstone is it's just the thickening and thickening of the bile. And then some of these gallstones at the middle of a little parasite. I knocked almost everybody out tonight because of this great question.
Yeah.
So I got the Energizer Bunny thing going.
Yes, you do.
So to finish that, then in this particular diet, then that's why it's worth looking into and having an open mind. We were talking in a discussion earlier about veganism, and veganism. The context for veganism is warm climate, and not a lot of stress. Because generally vegan diets don't have enough protein, especially with this climate, because you need thermal heat. So thank you, folks, for bearing with us. If you did watch a recording this long, you are a superhero. Yay, thank you.